with a lot of the things that we're talking about, a lot of these solutions, when you're overthinking, it feels like such a complex place to be. But actually, if you can figure out methods of moving yourself away from that, they're often quite simple methods to get us out of it.
Welcome to the Red Print, your wellness podcast. I'm Daanish.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Neil.
Today, we're going to be talking about overthinking, specifically why we overthink things that are important.
Why this stops us unleashing our creativity.
And how to hack your brainwaves to stop you overthinking.
Welcome to the Red Print, your wellness podcast. So we're going to be talking about overthinking for today's podcast. I was looking at it. So for the research, like in my own words, what overthinking is the key word. I rumination a lot. So I look at past events and I always wonder, if I said this, if I done this, wouldn't that be way better? If I done that, wouldn't I be in a way better scenario now? So it's always about worrying about what else you could do. However, there's the flip side too, that the future, thinking about the future. So let's say, for example, you have a deadline, something important coming up, something coming on the horizon, and then you keep on thinking about what is possibly going to happen in the future. You're just kind of predicting what might happen and you're trying to prepare for it. However, as you look at the future, you get more and more anxious because you're not sure if you're prepared for it, or you're just thinking about all these scenarios coming to life, which in a sense just make your mind go further and further down that loop, down that spiral, because you just keep on thinking about what this might happen. And if this happens, this is going to happen to me. So those are the two main ones. And then there's also another one, which I didn't know was overthinking until I was looking at it. So it's kind of like mind reading, like worrying about what the other person might say. So let's say we're having a conversation right now. Instead of being in the moment and listening to you, I'm then wondering if what I say is going to be right. If, of course, if I say this, will it look bad on me? If I do this, will it look bad on me? So you're not being your true self. You're kind of taken into everyone else's circumstances and letting that impact you. So through that, you're not being your true self. So that's what I've experienced in terms of overthinking. What about the both of you? What are your experiences, definitions? Let's hear it.
I haven't been on a journey with overthinking. I simply am always overthinking. There's no journey there. There is just what I have always done. And I've learned, various different techniques and things to like try and curb some of those elements that I'm less good on. But yeah, I'm definitely an overthinker. I spend a lot of time, as we said about before, I like the idea that I am in control of events. I like the idea that I am in control of my life. I like the idea that if I plan as much as I can, that I can actually predict what's going to happen, and I can have some sort of control of that. So I spend a lot of time. I think part of it for me is backwards looking. A lot of it for me, the overthinking, is that forwards part. So it's a lot about thinking about the contingencies, what might happen. If this happens, this could happen, blah, blah, blah. So, I'm very good at creating these complex kind of webs of what could happen. And like so many of these things, part of that I am thankful for. I think it allows me to do a lot, because it allows me to be able to kind of think about lots of different alternatives, and that can sometimes make me more creative. But of course, there are a lot of elements that become quite dangerous within that, and curbing, taking the edges off it, and almost not overthinking for me is where I have to kind of draw my line. So I'm an overthinker, but I try and just curb it a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the tricky thing with it, is that a lot of the reasons that we overthink, the way we're using our brain is like helpful to us in lots of ways, trying to think what are the consequences, and even trying to predict what someone else is thinking or feeling. That can be helpful. That's like you being empathetic and you thinking about how your actions might impact them. But when I was looking into this, I came across, and I think this might be similar to what Daanish came across, like cognitive distortions and thinking errors. So things like believing that you can tell what another person thinks and feels, and assuming like that, oh, that person thinks I'm an idiot now, and they hate me. That's other things I think sometimes, especially if I'm just up in a bad place or in a very hormonal place. I'll think, oh my God, I've said this and someone hates me and I've messed up, and everyone's thinking about that. You know that thing I said yesterday? And it's funny because I'm thinking about a specific thing I did say yesterday that I'm like regretting, and I'm like, oh, this person probably thinks I'm an idiot and a really bad person and is thinking about that all the time. And I know that that's an error because in real life, they've forgotten about me. They've forgotten about it. They're not thinking about me, but I've got this spotlight effect on myself. And I also believe for some reason that I can read their mind and know they're thinking that. So that was one of them. Another one, which links to what Daanish said as well, was fortune telling, believing that we know the future. And we can just think, oh, it's definitely going to go wrong. Oh, I know that if this happens, this will happen. Because what you spoke about is sometimes we try and like plan things out and think, okay, if we do this, this might happen. And we're trying to like optimize the likelihood of there being a good outcome. But instead of that, we assume that we know that there will be a bad outcome if a certain thing happens. Which I have when I think, and again, for me, it tends to be the small things. I was thinking about this, like with overthinking, yeah, I don't think about the big things. Like there could be really big, bad things happening in my life. And I feel like I go into crisis mode, I can manage it, I'm all right. It's the small little things. If I make a mistake on Blackboard, I think, that's it, I'm getting fired. My life is over, I've got no job, I'm going to be homeless in a few months. Like I just go down that route. Yeah, so that was one of the other ones. And then I think another one was about minimizing. So we minimize the things that we've done in the past. So you could say to me, maybe I'm a university student and I'm saying, oh, I'm going to fail my next assignment. I can't do it. There's no point. And you could say to me, well, Rachel, you passed your other assignments. Oh, that didn't count. That was just luck. That, oh, I was just having a good day and my friends helped me and whatever. We'll minimize the things we've done in the past. That's another thinking error. And then the last one is kind of the opposite, where we're overstating the importance of ourselves. And we are thinking that we are responsible for everything. Our actions are everything. And if anything ever goes wrong, it's our fault, which also isn't the case. So these like cognitive distortions, I think, are also a part of overthinking or thinking errors. So that's what I ended up reading about. And I was like, yeah, definitely done those.
If you use those past experiences where you've done something similar, you complete an assignment, and use that to empower yourself rather than bring yourself down, I think that'll help a lot. Because I was reading a book by David Goggins, his new one, Can't Hurt Me. So it was like a cookie jar. So in that cookie jar is all those moments from yourself where you've accomplished something, no matter how small, large, something that you're proud of. And within that cookie jar, every time you're looking at something that's stopping you, something that's bringing you down, you go into that mental cookie jar, take something that you've accomplished and use that to egg you on further, rather than using those thoughts to bring you down further and further.
It's interesting. I remember coming across reading somewhere at some point a few years ago about people saying be solutions focused, don't be problem focused. And for a while, I then sort of brought that into my sort of like daily rhetoric of being like focused on the problems. And also there's always more solutions than there are problems. Any problem is going to have multiple solutions. And then I watched the documentary about Fire Festival, and it's the exact same rhetoric that the guy in the Fire Festival uses. So I've kind of actively stopped telling myself that, but then every time I do come across a problem, I just think like there are loads of solutions to what you're dealing with here. There are going to be loads of solutions, and also that there is a certain amount of, we have to trust our intuition on this, and overthinking actually gets in the way of us being intuitive, because it makes us or what we're trying to do is we're trying to rationalize everything. I'm trying to make sure that I've got everything all stacked up and everything all in the right direction. And exactly like you were saying, Rachel, all of those points, it's about the individual being at the center of everything. Like, we are at the center and we have all of that control. So I'm trying to be rational. And if I can be rational, I can do it all. As opposed to saying, okay, if I can trust my intuition, and that being something, there was a book, Raj Ranganathan, I was reading about it, but he spoke about this idea of intuition, and saying that about 60% of the problems that we solve, we actually don't even know how we solved it, or we don't even know how we came up with the idea to get there, because it was just intuition. It just came to us in the moment. We can't overthink those sort of things. And I think by, in overthinking, we're actually stopping those really good, really creative ideas being there. Of course, the bit that we come on to after that is, well, how do you stop overthinking? Because that's not a straightforward thing in itself. But if we can, it can allow us to be more creative and to have solutions that we never would have even thought about. Whereas the overthinking only gives us what we kind of know.
I think something that helps me when it comes to overthinking, when I feel like I'm in that mode and wanting to control everything, wanting to plan everything, believing obviously that I'm the center of the universe and can control everything, is the Serenity Prayer. Have any of you heard of that? It doesn't have to be a religious thing. For me, it's not a religious thing, and it's, it originally comes from Christianity, but the words of it, I remember coming across it when I was younger, and I was like, oh my goodness, I love it. So it's grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's something that I say to myself sometimes, where I'm just like, okay, can I even change this? Because some things you just can't change, like, especially when I'm ruminating. If I'm going back and I'm thinking, oh, yesterday I said that stupid thing, and I'm thinking, oh, everyone hates me, obviously, whatever. But then I can look back and I can think about this phrase and this statement, and I can think, look, I can't change that now. It's done, so I can move on from it. And that's something that I say to myself, to like take the charge and take the power out of these things that I'm worrying about that are in the past. And then when it comes to the things that are in the future, I can really have a think, okay, is this something I have control over? Is it something that I don't have control over? And that can kind of help me decide whether it's worth me kind of going down the rabbit hole with.
I love that. I had that written down as well, because that was one that someone had said about it to me a couple of years back, and I really like it. My question is, approaching this from a really rational standpoint here, but the bit that I struggle with is, how do I know how to tell the difference? Because so there's certain things that I find, okay, yes, there are some really obvious things that I can't do anything about that, and therefore I need to let it go. The part that's more difficult is then thinking, you could have a little impact, a direct impact on so many things. So I find it really difficult to be able to tell the difference and to be able to tell what I can plan for and what I can't. Because for me, I think most things I could plan for, or if I've had a bad experience about something, let's say I've said something, then I'm going to overthink about saying, well, here's how to prevent myself from doing it in the future. So I could almost use that prayer against myself and say, what I can change is making sure that I never do this again. And here's the things that I put in place. So I guess my question is, how do you find it? Is it an intuitive thing that you can kind of get a feeling for what you can and can't change?
I think I want to draw attention to this wonderful case study we've got of Neil overthinking the Serenity Prayer. I think this is beautiful.
Exactly. Like, that is exactly it. It's because I'm trying to then rationalize it, as opposed to just being like, yeah, that's what it feels like to do those things. If I actually just let myself feel situations, I think I'd be in a better place. But I'm trying to then like put things into boxes.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting.
And how do you go through it, Rachel?
I think that I err on the side of not doing things and not trying to change things generally, because we also, in my head, I'm thinking trying to change things as well, I can always make things worse, not better. Okay. So generally when and maybe it is that when I'm in a moment where I'm using the Serenity Prayer, I think I'm using it because I actually intuitively know that this is something that I can't change and need to move on from. So maybe even before I've got to that point, like that's something I'm doing to comfort myself to not change things, rather than being like, oh, is this a moment where I can make a difference or not? I think actually, if I'm being honest with myself, I've made the decision that I shouldn't try and change that. And I'm trying to make peace with that.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, I think that might be really what's going on.
Like accepting what has happened or what has passed. And then I'm saying, like, when you're in that moment where a past or the situation happens and then you're so fixated on it, you keep on running it down in your head, picking out all the small details. And then when you're picking out the small details, I think for me as well, like, or whoever's listening, when you're picking out the small details, you can look at what you can control and what was not in your control in that moment.
And for me, like the unhelpful advice for me then, when I read about this, and again, you know, when you look at overthinking and do a Google search for overthinking, top 10 results are going to say, just think positive, you know, put yourself in a good mindset, or, you know, stop thinking about the bad things about it. And I struggle to actually be able to achieve that. Do you think have you both come across any unhelpful advice when it comes to overthinking?
So the last point you mentioned here, like, stop thinking bad thoughts. Like, that's all well and good saying that, but when it comes to application, you just sat there just looking at those words like, who wrote this? Like, who? Thank you for your advice. It's like, you know, when you're upset and someone's saying, don't be upset. You're like, you just look at that person and like, okay, anyway. So
if someone calm down to me and I'm already calm and someone says calm down, I'm like, calm down.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
They are the worst possible things you could say.
Well, I think, like, in terms of not thinking bad thoughts, I think a better one would be kind of like flipping it into like a good advice, like flipping it into change your state. So you're not in the same. So let's say I'm sitting down, it's been a few hours since I'm sitting down and I've just been thinking the same thoughts as I've been doing my work. Instead of getting up and going outside or doing some press ups, changing my state, changing my thoughts. Because I think for me, when I actually change my state, I'm actually doing something different. I'm not stuck in my head. I'm not like getting it going because I'm doing something else. So I'd say, instead of just stop thinking bad thoughts, I'd say change your state, and then through changing your state, changing your body, changing your body language, you would then think different thoughts, as long as you want to think different thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that idea about changing the state, this is the advice that I came across. I hadn't come across it beforehand, but I think for me, there was some bits and pieces that I was reading, and it really made sense to me, as opposed to because the things of like, just stop thinking about it, don't worry about it, they're all platitudes, you know, that like they're the end point. It's like, yeah, but how do I get to there? Like, yes, that's where I want to be, but how do I get to there? And what I was reading about was the idea of hacking your brain waves. That we've got different types of brain waves, and what makes us overthink is our beta brain waves, and that's basically the high alert brain waves. So they're the ones that we used to use as human beings loads. We used to need it loads because we needed to be on sort of like high stress alert, but now it overdoes things. So now what happens is that sends us into these spirals because our bodies don't really know how to use it. So the advice is you should hack your brainwaves, and instead of allowing these beta brainwaves to be the dominant ones, that you should draw on, or you should try and induce the other ones. So there's things like the theta brainwaves, which is the ones that, you know, if you're like driving and you just switch off, and you're not really paying attention to anything in particular. You're just kind of on the road, your mind's wandering, and you're not like, you might solve a problem when you're doing that. You know, that's the theta brainwave. So one way to stop your beta brainwaves is to increase your theta ones. So you find that thing that makes you just kind of switch off. There's the gamma brainwaves, which are the ones that happen when you're focused and you're concentrating. So find a job that you actually really like doing. So for me, it's normally like working with like wood or something, you know, like creating something. I really like physical tasks. That makes me actually focus on something. Rachel, I can see you laughing. I know exactly why you're laughing. Thank you for that. So we've got those ones. Then there's other ones which are your alpha brain waves, which is the non-arousal brain waves. So they're the ones that you do when you're resting and relaxing. And then there's the delta brain waves that are the ones that you use when you're sleeping. So all that is to say, there's different sorts of brain waves. And actually, to get to that point where you're not worrying about something or you're not thinking about something, actually just find the things that put you or create those brain waves. So for me, it would be, driving, doing a physical task, maybe going for a nap, at sleeping, it puts me into that sort of state. So finding those ones is actually what can stop those brainwaves coming through. And that will then lead to all of these platitudes that people talk about. So for me, that actually kind of sorts it out. That makes it much easier and much clearer for me to be able to see how I might physically stop overthinking.
Yeah, with that, you can even turn those individual points you just mentioned into like a routine, because then it's every day or like every couple of days you have that, and it's kind of stopping you from getting to that state. Like you understand where you are in terms of overthinking. If you're starting to overthink, that might mean, especially I've experienced when I stop my routine really in general, that's when it creeps in. Then I start my schedule again, and then that's how I overcome it. I think rather than just thinking it, you actually have to put yourself in those situations, these examples you've mentioned, and then it will happen.
And it kind of gives you just a little toolkit. So if you find yourself overthinking, you're like, okay, well, what are the particular things that I can do that actually induce these feelings? And maybe some of them don't work all the time. Maybe if you're like, there's no way I could go and have a nap because I'm way too wired. Okay, cool. We'll go and do another sort of task. Go and do another thing that will take your.
It's not rigid. You can do whatever you need to do within that moment.
And again, if we look at beta as the problem, there are more solutions than there are problems. The problem is one type of brainwave, and there's actually 4 different other types of brainwaves that could be your solution to just get you out of that loop.
It's really interesting. I like this point. Get yourself in a different state, get yourself moving, and then you will then, hopefully with intention, review your problem, review any situation you're in with a different, I suppose, light, different lens. And then another point was like, what is it? Identify the root. Why are you overthinking? Yeah, it all links together. Why are you overthinking? Understand that, change your state, then look at the situation through a different lens. Because it might become really simple after you change your state. It might just be because you went down such a narrow focus that it's been amplified so much. So change your state. I think that would be key.
I think something that weirdly helps me if I'm ruminating or if I'm overthinking and I know it's not helpful, I know it's not something that I can really change or sort out, is, and it's the automatically, which is kind of embarrassing, but I visualize things, and I will imagine that there's like a switch in my head and I'm switching it, or I will imagine, have you heard of like autonomous, what are they called? Automatic negative thoughts or autonomous negative thoughts, which is what they're called. Like, you know, you have these thoughts that just like penetrate into your brain, they just occur from nowhere, and they're just like, you're bad or whatever. So they're called autonomous negative thoughts or automatic negative thoughts. And I imagine them that they're like ants on me, and I've just like hit them, and I just imagine, and I do like visualize it. And there's different kind of scenarios that I have in my head, where I visualize them, and then I imagine they're gone, and then I move on to something else. And I just have it in my head as this like clear thing. Okay, like, and I'm aware that it's happening. So I pay attention to it for a moment and go, okay, I'm aware of this. This is in my mind. Then I flick the switch, or I, kill the ants, and then I will go and play Switch, or I will go and do something else. So that's something I do. I'm not sure if it's scientifically supported that I am doing this, or whether I'm just weird, but that's what helps me.
Cool. So, folks, any final thoughts? Any last bits to add in? Any other final top tips for students who are dealing with any sort of aspects of overthinking? Richard Williams,
So
you're up.
one that we haven't spoken about yet, but I think we talk about it in other episodes, which is probably why it hasn't come up a lot, is talking to other people. And I think it links to what Nick, what Neil said.
Did you just call me Nick?
I think it's linked to that. I was like, Neil, links to what Nick said, Phil. It links to what Neil said about perspective. And I think talking to someone else can sometimes just give you perspective. If you are going down a rabbit hole, thinking something's a big deal, whatever you're doing, just talking to someone else can sometimes really help.
Because it gives another lens on it. Like you realize how, I'm not going to say small, but how a different perspective kind of just shifts it into place. Just like, oh, okay. And it was just like, you just tick it off. That's all it is. Like, because you're so fixated on it, you put so much importance on that problem. When you get another perspective, you're like, oh, it's just this. And you're like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. It's kind of like your mind's just like blown from just like a simple sentence. Like you just need to, I'm not going to say keep it simple, but just, you know, understand, or even put pen to paper, really. Like when you're looking at solutions, like when you're trying to find the best solution, for example, put pen to paper, break it down, nice and simple.
100%. Yeah, I think writing things down and writing down what you think is going to happen is also really helpful, because sometimes when you're writing down something, you know, the worst case scenario, when you write it down and you see it, you think, oh, actually, that's probably not going to happen. Like, it gives it some perspective. And I think the other one that I don't think we ever touched on this is, you know, speaking to people and speaking to friends, but also speaking to professionals, you know, and going to, you know, talking therapies could be really helpful for these sorts of things. And there's a stigma that comes along with that, right? Of, you know, like kind of like you sort it out yourself and you speak to your friends, your family. But actually, for some folks, you know, actually going and seeking someone out who, you know, is trained in discussing these issues, it could illuminate a lot of things. And if nothing else, would be interesting. So I think that it's always worth having that as something to bear in mind, that exists as a great option.
I think that's brilliant advice. I think sometimes people worry as well about being like unwell or unwell enough to get help. And I don't think that you need to be at a certain place in order to get help. I think everyone really could benefit.
Never a dead end. You always have avenues to go down. You always have a path to travel. There's no point thinking that there is no way to take a step forward.
Right then.
I'm going to spend the rest of the afternoon ruminating on calling Neil Nick. So
yeah, I'm going to be thinking about me saying that I like to concentrate by playing with wood. So yeah, I'm glad that this podcast has sent us both off into a spiral. Daanish, anything you're going to be overthinking as a result of this?
I'll just do both of yours. So, you know, I'll write down the pros and cons for each.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, he could just reflect on his decision to start a podcast with two strange people.
Correct. Who are going to spend the rest of their days thinking about those things. That is correct. That's where you need to be right now. Right then. Lovely to see you both. Have a wonderful week.
Peace.
See ya.